So, if you've been here since the early days of my channel, you may probably know that a lot of the videos I made in the past usually originate from the comment section in some shape or form. That's how I originally got the idea for the second Skylanders video I ever made, and that's how the custom Skylanders video series came to be. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because a comment from one of my videos actually caught my attention, and it's this one that was written by a user named Evelyn Fan Club. Since it's pretty lengthy, I won't tell you to stop the video to read it on your own, so quote, "In all honesty, Skylanders lore is a good example of missed potential. It features one of the most original storylines, character designs, and world building I have ever seen, paired with the most generic main villain, primitive black and white morals, random filler, unfinished plot lines, horrendous plot holes, countless retcons, and nonsensical contradictions. It's a combination of art and brain rot. I dearly love one half, but absolutely despise the other." Now, I know that this comment is on the more negative side, so don't go and mess with them, and if you have issues, please be constructive about it, but you gotta admit that they're kinda right about a couple of aspects. We discussed one of these contradiction/plot holes in last week's video with Lightning Rod, and we can't forget about the whole mess with the gap in time between Trap Team and Superchargers. And you can't dismiss their claims on the black and white morals either, since to me, that locks away so many potential story ideas. And this criticism right here is what spurred me to make this video. Skylanders as a franchise is far older than most people think. In actuality, this year is going to be the 10th anniversary of Skylanders Superchargers, and in the same vein, the first game is going to turn 15. And the idea of a potential reboot or sequel game has become more of a popular idea as of late, so that got me wondering on how Skylanders could possibly return, and what aspects would be changed for the modern day. Now, this video isn't supposed to be like Return to Skylands where I talk about what I want for a Skylanders game. Instead, I'm going to talk about a multitude of options and settle on what I think is going to be the most likely one. So that's what we're going to do today. We are going to speculate on what a second Skylanders game might look like and the aspects that might differentiate it from other games. So with that being said and done, let's jump right into it. Now, I know that many of you are probably confused about what I mean when I say game mechanics, and the best way I can explain this is the flow of the game itself. Is it going to be the same level and combat flow it has been for the previous 6 games, or are we going to switch things up? And if you're still kind of confused, think about the differences between Hollow Knight's combat and movement and Silksong's combat and movement. Though these two games were made by the same people, their combat systems are very different to each other outside the two being Metroidvanias. On one hand, Silksong is much faster compared to the flow to your Hollow Knight, but in exchange, it is much harder to compensate for the player's brand new skills, tools, and speed in the form of harder bosses, more intense enemies, and more complex parkour and puzzles. And the reason why I bring this up for Skylanders is because its base mechanics as a whole have been pretty similar throughout the years, especially when you take a look at Swap Force and beyond. Yes, they added jumping in Swap Force, and yes, they added attacking wall jumping in Trap Team, but other than that, things have been pretty similar. Along with enemies being pretty easy to fight, puzzles being nonsensically easy for the most part, and parkour being practically non-existent outside of jumping from platform to platform. And this is for a reason. At the time, Skylanders was mainly a kids game, so the mechanics had to be pretty simple, at least compared to other games at the time. And since most of the older generation of Skylanders fans are adults now, or at least still in high school, a bit more challenge other than you'll get 2-shot would be a very welcome one. But to be completely honest, even if everyone wanted the game to be faster, with stronger, more complex enemies, and more intricate mechanics, this is probably something that cannot really be changed. Mostly because of the Skylanders themselves. If Toys for Bob, or more likely Activision Blizzard since Vicarious Visions is now Blizzard Albany and Activision Publishing owns the Skylanders IP, wanted to make changes to the mechanics, they would have to overhaul over 180 Skylanders just for one. Let me give you an example. Let's say for the next hypothetical Skylanders game, they want to add a dash mechanic to not only spice up platforming, but make it easier for a player to evade an attack in a faster atmosphere. Well, they would not only have to go through, once again, over 180 different Skylanders, but they would also have to make animations for many of these Skylanders who were never meant to dash, which might break the balancing, but they would also have to tweak the dash of Skylanders who already have one or more similar mechanics. You see how much work that would be just to add a single mechanic? The only thing that I could really see changing gameplay-wise is the puzzles, since all you would really have to do is make them more complex. You could also do the same with enemies, but that would also create a problem in and of itself, since instead of making it too hard for the younger audience, it would make certain Skylanders far more difficult to the point of being nearly impossible to play without being tweaked, which once again takes up a lot of time. So what I'm basically trying to say here is that it would be pretty damn unlikely for any changes to come to the main mechanics. But since we are here, let's go over the Skylanders themselves. More specifically, their gimmicks. Outside of elements, the Skylanders as a whole usually fall into two separate groups. The core Skylanders, the Skylanders that aren't attached to a gimmick, and the Gimmicklanders, which are the ones who are. And the reason why I bring this up is because we need to figure out if the game should start out with a new gimmick or focus on the cores. Now, I know you may think that this is a simple answer depending on which one you prefer, but it's actually a little more complex than you think. On one hand, sticking to cores would be a cheap and a little boring, but safe option, while making a brand new gimmick requires tons of planning and work, since if that was the case, what would this gimmick even be? This new gimmick would have quite the big burden on it, since it not only has to be interesting on its own, but it would also have to be interesting enough to kickstart the next potential age of Skylanders. And surprisingly, we have plenty of contenders. Dual elements, swappable weapons, multiple different team-based gimmicks, and plenty of others are all on the table here. But there's one that I see as the best option. A gimmick focused on past Skylanders, more specifically, how they aged while we were gone. This has been a pretty popular gimmick idea for a while now, and bringing back old Skylanders and making them stronger than ever before would definitely make a difference. But speaking of them, that raises the next massive problem we need to face. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it here. Making a new Skylanders game in and of itself is already going to be difficult. Adding the task of making new figures is going to be a disaster. They aren't just going to be making 30 or so figures like they did in the past. They are going to have to make every single Skylander ever made, and a whole new portal for consoles and PC because Skylanders are required for the game to work. And for the cherry on top, all these portals need to be built differently so they could actually work, since the hardware for each console is going to be different. Since old Skylander figures aren't on shelves anymore, at least outside of retro game stores, and most people don't know how to program their own NFC cards, which might get cracked down on if Skylanders does return, that will lock away a majority of the Skylanders from the roster if they only decided to make a handful, not to mention the cost of the figures themselves. If I remember correctly, cores usually cost around $10, and going off the Swap Force figures, which is extremely generous, gimmick figures go for $15. Assuming that you just want to play the game to its fullest, that means you would need to pay between $80 to $120 if you want every element. And once again, that's being generous since we aren't considering that they take the path of Nintendo and that there are 2 elements in the starter pack. And if people are going to riot over the amiibos, they are sure as hell going to rage over this since it's actively locking content away from you. So the Skylanders will probably just be built into the game and given a system to switch between them, whatever that may be. Now, this is an idea that I have seen thrown around recently, and to put it simply, this is probably not going to happen because all of the hurdles that the developers would have to jump through. Let me explain. Firstly, Skylands isn't like any open world in the sense that you could literally wander anywhere on an open map. Instead, Skylands is more like a cluster of islands that are separated from each other by extreme distances, so you would either have to use an airship or flying character to get around, which would kind of defeat the point and be pretty boring if it wasn't instant, or trap the player on one giant island, which raises its own problem: actually finding stuff to put there. The biggest problem that most open world games have been having for the past 5 years is that there is literally nothing in them for you to go around and do. And I don't mean that in the sense that the world is empty, I mean that in the sense that there are these massive gaps in between actually interesting areas that waste time and energy. Everyone likes the exploring part of open worlds, but nobody likes traveling 1.9 kilometers to reach the next objective. Not to mention that making one giant island would break the allure of Skylands itself, where there's an uncountable number of islands of all shapes and kinds you could possibly visit. Now, you could argue that you could just spice things up by giving the players multiple islands to go to as the story progresses, and that would work, but that's just circling back to a Skylanders level, but instead, it's now just very big and very long. Plus, having to figure out how the camera would work, balancing it for every Skylander so it's not a chore for most to get around, and having the story revolve around it would be a very big task for the developers. But speaking of the story, I know this one is going to be very strange for some of you, but we're only going to be here for a brief moment, and it's still worth bringing up. It would be hard to deny that Kaos being the main villain, or one of the crucial villains for every single Skylanders game outside of a few DS versions, has gotten pretty repetitive over time. But since we are going back into Skylanders with this theoretical game, having Kaos there as the main villain again would make sense since he's far too iconic to remove in my eyes. I mean, the Skylanders community is probably forever intertwined with the Hell of a Boss fanbase simply because Richard Horvitz voices one of its main characters, and a random line of his from the first pilot is so iconic that it became an in-joke for 3 different fandoms. No normal mortal can pull something like that off unless they are an icon. And since we're on the topic of Hell of a Boss, let's talk about the final decision of today, and this is going to be a big one. Now, I know this sounds a little harsh, but this is less of should the Skylanders have a more mature rating, and more should the Skylanders tell a more mature story. And the reason why I bring this up is actually because of 3 things: Superchargers and Imaginators, the fandom itself, and the Fanlanders. So let's get going. Skylanders Superchargers as a game is probably one of the most divisive within the community with its own positives and negatives, but if there is one thing that I've seen throughout the past few years is how much praise the story has gotten, mostly for how mature it is compared to other games. They treat the Sky Eater like an actual threat, they show Kaos being manipulated and in many cases extorted by the darkness, and when they did the fake out death for Glumshanks' quote-unquote death, even though it clearly was supposed to be Glumshanks' death until some higher business power stopped it, it was treated with the gravity it deserved. And going from that to Imaginators sure as hell gave plenty of people a crap load of whiplash, me being one of them. And I didn't even play the game either, I just watched the game movie for it. And I genuinely hate that story. It's just so damn stupid, it makes you feel that way if you actually care about what's going on, since instead of treating their audience, you know, the people who were most likely there since the beginning with any intelligence, it instead makes lame jokes, gives out ridiculous plot points that can't even make up for it by being funny, and tries to course correct the franchise into aligning with the TV show, even though it was about to die. And since most of the fan base, you know, the first people who are actually going to buy this new game, are mostly either teens and adults, they all probably can handle a story that is more mature than the games before. Now, I'm not advocating for Skylanders to become this M-rated series with blood and guts and beloved characters getting assassinated. What I am advocating for is a Skylanders game that is a bit more complex than past entries. Maybe a little more moral complexity here, a couple of new antagonists that actually have a personality outside of expanded media here. You understand what I mean, and I'm pretty sure that's what may happen. If anything, this game should probably go no higher than a T rating, since anything above that would either be too jarring, too confusing, or flat out pointless. So with that, this is where we're going to end things for now. Now, I know that this was a pretty strange video since I already technically made a similar video for RTS, specifically episode 0, but this was a video where I forced myself to look at this objectively. So with that being said and done, thank you for watching. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so I can grow the channel, leave some comments down below to make the algorithm happy, check out Return to Skylands, its Discord, and a bunch of other stuff down below in the description. Make sure to hype up the video and spread it to the masses, and I will see you all in the next one.